This isn't exactly the order that you will be bringing people. And there's another difference. There are going to be many exhibits in these rooms. Again, the Chaska Historical Society, the Carver County Historical Society, the Minnesota Historical Preservation Society, all of these institutions, plus an exhibit on Native American culture, are going to be here on Angel Fest. And many of these rooms will be filled with exhibits. So we're going to have stationary docents. Those are perhaps you or other people will be around here to answer questions and just to observe people, just to make sure that nobody's taking anything they shouldn't be, but mostly to be practicing hospitality. These are friary cells. Here's a typical one. Why is it a cell? Well, it's a cell not because of, we're thinking of jail, right? Oh yeah, the religious life, monks and nuns, they practically live jail lives. Not at all. The cell was taken from the beehive, the cells in the comb. And so they considered themselves to be bees working together, living together, eating together under one roof for the sake of the mission of Jesus Christ. And so it was total dedication of their lives. And so these rooms are called cells, and they're named, this is St. Paschal, for example, named after Franciscan saints. Franciscans who eventually were recognized as saints. Here's St. John Capistran, or we might have heard San Juan Capistrano, which is one of the Franciscan missions in California. This is Our Lady of Perpetual Help. She wasn't officially a Franciscan, but the Franciscans obviously loved her. This is dedicated to her. So they don't have numbers for these rooms. They're named after people, after saints. So I would show them some of these cells. I wouldn't let them linger too long because they have a lot to see. Just want to point out for you, but not for your guests, this is where the original stairway went up into the attic in 1868. Let's go down this way. You can see a bathroom in the 1870s edition, right? Now in 1870s and 1880s, people did not have indoor plumbing. They went outside. But this must have been later on, perhaps with the 1913 edition, they probably did some work here. And then we can see some more rooms. And the wardrobe room. And today we have old vestments in there. They would not have had old vestments in there before. They would have probably had their Franciscan habits, their Franciscan garments. Here's an old basin that they probably would have washed up in the morning. They did not shower or bathe every day like we do. That was sort of a weekly or a monthly thing, and it was especially more challenging during the winter months. So they would get kind of, rank, but people in the 1800s would wash themselves, and if they were not religious people, religious community members like Franciscans, they put on perfume. A lot of perfume was put on to masquerade, or cologne was put on to masquerade that stuff. Well, the Franciscan friars living a simple life wouldn't have put on cologne, so you could tell probably in the 1800s when Brother so and so forth was nearby. Anyway, so this is the wardrobe area, and we're not sure, but we believe this is where, at least in the 1870s and 80s and 90s, this is where the guardian probably lived, because it's a double room. Here's another favorite room of people. It's at the end of this hallway, and you gotta love the door, right? And here's the thing. Notice this. After you've brought people in there, I'm going to ask that you actually stand here and say, please watch your step, please watch your step, please watch your step, Please watch your step. That's as if you're a traveling docent going with these people. And offer people hands. But when you go in here, encourage them to please stand close to here, right? As opposed to in the back. And this view is a killer view. You really get a chance to see, with all the lights, the glorious architecture and art of this church. I'd like to point out one thing, and that's up. I want to point up. You see the stars in the sky. Remember how I mentioned the stars in the Stargate, or the time tunnel that is the arch of the sanctuary? Well, the stars here are trying to show something about heaven. Now, you will hear some architectural critics, again, this is way more than you need to mention, but you'll hear some architectural critics who will say of, let's just say, the large cathedrals in Europe built in the medieval era, how they were built really tall, so that once you came in, you looked up and you were sort of transported up, right? And reminding you about how earthly life kind of like is crappy and terrible, right? How earthly life is terrible and how we should all be oriented up into heaven. Actually, that's an inaccurate understanding. It's not that we're going up with Christianity. It's that heaven is coming down into our lives, if you will. Of course, heaven is everywhere, so the word down is problematic. But heaven is breaking into our lives. The really real is breaking into our reality. And we are actually citizens of heaven, in part, more fully in the hereafter, hopefully. But citizens of heaven, in part, citizens of the kingdom of God, here in this world. So heaven's breaking down into this world, and that's what this is trying to show in the ceiling, with the heavenly ceiling coming down into this beautiful place. This was never a choir loft, and this was never a choir loft. It was a place where the Franciscans would come and pray and meditate. Remember, watch your step and offer a hand to the person. Now we're going to quickly go into the addition on what we now call the second floor. And I want to point out the library. Here is the 1913 edition. Here's the library for the Franciscan Friars. And if we can just have a scan of these books, we ask people not to touch them, but we can see the Roman Missal that the Mass was celebrated from in the very old days, in the relatively recent days of the 40s, and you can see these things. As you can see, the Franciscans were not exactly into fashion. In fact, remember, their life was one of simplicity and poverty. Many of these books are in German and Latin, and they weren't taken with the Franciscans when they left in the 1990s. Here you can see another thing that the children love. At Christmas time, we still bring this out. People put a coin in there, and it rings a bell. And that money is given to the poor. Remember, the poor have a very special place in the heart of Franciscans. More